Everybody, to this is Dream, and today we have a 12-game Major League Baseball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? We have a decent slate today overall. It was kind of rough on the pitching side of things. We got a lot of tough matchups, so let's go and get into it though. So we're gonna start with Snell for the Padres. He's been good most of the season. He's got a good matchup against a team that he can get a good K rate against. He's probably one of the top pitchers on the slate to play, as he's got a good matchup against Miami. We're also going to look at Kikuchi for Toronto. Now, he has a bit of a Hail Mary call here, as he's managed to give up no more than one earned run in 6 straight games, though he does have a tough matchup here against Baltimore, and I do like some bats from them. But he's had 4 20 fantasy point games in this 6 game stretch, and I think that gives him a lot of utility here. He's pitching very well and getting some decent strikeout rates as well. Then we're going to look at Miller for the Dodgers. He's had some ups and downs throughout the season, but he looks like a decent play today in a plus matchup. If he can get the win, he should be able to jump over 20 fantasy points. And that said, the K rate is suspect, and he is facing a team that doesn't strike out a ton, but he is a guy that's in play on this particular slate. We're going to look at Wu for Seattle against the White Sox. He's a viable option here, even though he's coming off an injury, as he has a 15 to 25 game on the table in the fantasy point aspect. He's pitched a decent K rate as well. His floor is very bad though, but when he's coming back from injury here today, he should have some nice upside in this matchup in a very plus matchup. As you can see, a 15 to 25 point game is definitely in his range, and I think that's a very viable today in a plus matchup. And then we're going to look at Grayson Rodriguez for Baltimore. Now, he is a Hail Mary play today as he's nice and cheap. The reason he's in play is he's had 2 straight really good games over versus Toronto this season. He's faced them a couple weeks ago once, and then about a month ago the other time. And in both games, he scored 16 fantasy points. He's definitely capable of doing that again today. His strikeout rate has been pretty good against them, and it's been decent otherwise. So I do think he's a viable option, though he's high risk, high reward as a Hail Mary play. But he's nice and cheap, and he can get you a good opportunity to have a decent game. My super stacks today are Atlanta, the LA Dodgers, and Pittsburgh. They all face just great, terrible pitching and have great opportunity here. So let's go and get in our catchers here. We're going to start with Cal Raleigh, who absolutely monstered the ball yesterday for 43 fantasy points and 2 home runs. He's a great option today, again, as he's hitting the ball very well throughout the season when it comes to the home run potential, and he's hitting pretty decently lately. Though he does tend to be a bit of a boomer bust play, he is a good option today. Will Smith is also in play. Now, he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well as he normally does, but he is in play today with home run potential. He does need to get some games going where he has some good hits, but he's had a few multi-hit games recently. He's very capable of that, though he does need to hit a home run really to pay off at this price point. Then we'll look at Salvador Perez, excuse me, for the Kansas City Royals. He's hit the ball very well recently. He's hitting and scoring good fantasy points. His price is pretty fair, about the same price as Cal Raleigh, and he's hitting just about as well. He also has just as much home run upside, so he's a good contrarian option off of him. And then for a really value play here, we'll look at Francisco Alvarez for the Mets. As he draws some interesting metrics for this game, he has some potential here, though he has been somewhat boomer bust lately. He does draw home run potential in this game against Atlanta. Maybe in the first base, we'll look at Matt Olson. Excuse me. He has hit the ball pretty solidly throughout the season. He's also hitting a lot of home runs. He's had 3 in the last 10. He is in the chase with Ohtani for most home runs on the season right now. So he looks really solid in this matchup, though he's had a few straight games where he didn't do much. But if he can get out of that little bit of mini slump, then he'll be good to go today. Looking at Ohtani as the alternative to him, he's hit the ball pretty well recently with 3 home runs over the last 10 games. He is hitting better, and he's had a couple of decent games the last few, which give him some nice upside. He definitely has home run potential here and draws a really good matchup here against a weak pitcher in LA Angels. Then we'll look at the Brandon Belt for Toronto. Now, he is nice and cheap, which gives him some nice upside. He's had 3 home runs the last 10. He's got that home run potential, and he's been scoring a good amount of fantasy points even when he doesn't have home runs sometimes. So he's definitely capable of a good game here, and he's nice and cheap and helps you pay up at other positions. Ryan Mountcastle for Baltimore is also in play. If you don't go with Kikuchi, it's a good option for Baltimore stack. He also has hit the ball very well recently, which gives him some nice upside and home run potential as well. So maybe in second base, we'll look at Mookie Betts. Excuse me, for the Dodgers. He's hitting the ball extremely good. 430 batting average over the last 10 games with 3 home runs. He has nice upside here, but he is, extremely expensive and does need to hit a home run to pay off here, which he is definitely capable of doing. Uh, On the other hand, we can look at Brandon Drury, who's dirt cheap. Now, he hasn't hit the ball particularly well, but he's had a couple straight games with really good upside, and he's hit the ball very well in those games. And as long as he continues to hit, then he's going to be viable at this cheap price point, and he has a nice plus matchup today. Gabby Torres for the Yankees also in play today. He's hit the ball fairly solid this season. Um, Not as great as we'd like, but he does have the home run potential and has nice upside in this matchup. The Yankees are definitely reeling, but he's one of the few guys that is having some multi-hit games and stuff over the last few, and he does have some good upside from a fantasy point perspective. And then Tommy Edman, who has been somewhat good lately. He has been somewhat inconsistent. He does have some home run upside though. He has been boomer bust lately though, and so that is a concern. But he does have that capability to have big games, and he has some stolen base potential as well. Excuse me, moving to third base here. We're going to look at Austin Riley first for Atlanta. He's not hitting the ball very well recently, as he's only had 2 home runs over the last 10. He is capable, though, of a big game, and he is in a good situation here. I do like the Braves, though he is very expensive and somewhat hard to roster as a result. Manny Machado, though, has uh, hit the ball pretty good the last couple of games. He's had 3 home runs in the last 3 games, and he does draw some good matchup potential here. He tends to be somewhat streaky this season, so he's a viable option today as he's hitting the ball very well the last few. Alec Boom has not been particularly great. Let's see. B-O-M. Oh, sorry. I meant Kim, sorry. San Diego. He has not been particularly perfect recently, but he does draw good metrics for this game, and I do think he's going up against a pitcher that he's capable of having a big game against. He's also been really good against Miami this season, and he scored 32 fantasy points yesterday. He's the last couple of games he's starting to hit the ball good again, which is what we like to see. And then we'll look at Garcia for Kansas City, and a great situation here. He's hit the ball very well recently. He has nice upside and draws good metrics for this game. He has been somewhat inconsistent in scoring a ton of fantasy points, but he doesn't need a whole lot at this price point, so he's definitely a viable option on this particular slate. Excuse me, looking at Bobby Witt Jr. for Kansas City, he has hit the ball very well recently with 5 home runs over the last 10 and hitting a 400 average. He hasn't had a bad game in 5 games, and then he's had before that he had even more games with really big scores. He's just hitting the ball extremely well, scoring a lot of fantasy points a lot of different ways. Obviously, his prices come up, but he is a good play on the slate if you can figure out how to price him in there. Francisco Lindor also interesting today as he's hit the ball fairly well. He does face a little bit of a tougher matchup than Bobby Witt does, but he is a capable scorer, especially a fantasy point scorer today on the slate, though he is a little bit expensive. You can say the same for Carlos Correa, but he has not been quite as consistent throughout the season, but he is hitting the ball very well right now, and that gives him some nice upside here. Though he has had a few games in a row with hits without getting over 10 fantasy points, but his price is a little bit cheaper and gives you some potential from that perspective. J.P. Crawford also in play here. If he does, that's Crawford. Sorry about that. If he does play today, then he'll be a viable option as he's hit the ball pretty well recently and has some nice upside on this particular slate. Tommy Edman can also play at this position. Moving to outfielders, obviously Acuna and Judge are both in play today as they have massive home run upside. We'll also look at Corbin Carroll for the Arizona Diamondbacks as he's hit pretty solid this season and he does draw some nice upside in this game. He's only had 1 home run over the last 10, but he still managed to score fantasy points in different ways, though he is fairly expensive. Michael Harris is a core play for me today as he's hit the ball very well this season, but he has been somewhat inconsistent, but he has hit the ball pretty good the last couple weeks. Now he did have a couple games off, I think, so it looks like he's going to be good to go though. If he does draw a good start today, he's going to have really high metrics as he's nice and cheap for a Brave at least, and has good potential for a home run and stolen base potential. Then we're going to look at Brian Reynolds for Pittsburgh. Now he draws some interesting metrics here. I really like Pittsburgh today against St. Louis. He's facing a very weak pitcher. He's also hit the ball fairly well recently with 260 batting average with 3 home runs over the last 10. He draws interesting matchup metrics, and I think he's a viable option here. Santander for uh, Toronto, if he does draw or sorry for Baltimore, if he draws a start today, he'll have some home run upside today. He does feel boomer bust though, so do keep that in mind. But he is a viable option if he does suit up. And then Esterio Ruiz for Oakland. He does draw stolen base potential. He did manage a stolen base yesterday. He has to get on base really to pay off, and he needs to start as well. But typically, when he starts and gets a stolen base, he does tend to score over 10 fantasy points. And with his price point, he's a viable option today, though he is higher risk due to the fact that he may not start. And then we'll look at Varsho for Toronto. Now he draws really good metrics here. He's nice and cheap, and he's had some really good games lately. He has some home run upside as well. He seems like he's hitting the ball better than he did early in the season, so he definitely draws as a good option on the slate. And then finally, last but not least, Stanton for the Yankees. Now he is high risk, high reward as he's a boomer bust play with home run potential. He's been striking out a lot, but he does draw home run upside, and if he does play today, look, he took a couple of games off, I think. So if he does draw the start today, he should be revitalized and ready to go, and he is cheap enough that he's an option on the slate. With that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.